Hola, ¿qué tal? Seguimos en la Hora de Maquiavelo. Bueno, con una entrevista sumamente interesante. Vamos a entrevistar a Fadl Al-Tarzi, nombre árabe, que es sumamente interesante. Él es el CEO de una empresa que se llama SocialEyez, que es una empresa que se dedica a monitorear las redes sociales, ver qué es lo que se conversa, qué es lo que se dice de empresas, de gobiernos, y lo que tiene de interesante, esto que es novedoso, que es escuchar lo que habla la gente en las redes sociales, les sirve a muchas empresas para evitar lo que está pasando cada vez más frecuentemente, que son crisis que pueden ser muy graves. Acá tuvimos hasta un ejemplo vernáculo, si se quiere, con el caso de la crisis de los vasitos de Starbucks, de la que tanto hablamos, en donde, bueno, lo que se llama ahora el community manager de Starbucks se disculpó de que algunos se quejaban de que los vasitos que usaba en la cafetería esta, a algunos le quemaban los dedos, diciendo que lamentablemente eran made in Argentina. Bueno, el lío que se armó con esa disculpa que no se tendría que haber disculpado en un país tan ultranacionalista. Se armó un escándalo en las redes sociales que afectó un poco a la imagen de la empresa y sobre todo ante un gobierno que castiga ese tipo de cosas. Y por eso lo tenemos aquí a Fadl Al-Tarzi. Fadl, welcome to La Hora de Maquiavelo, or I don't know how to say it in English, maybe Machiavelli's show or whatever. But what I was introducing was that you help with SocialEyez companies and I guess as well as governments to anticipate crisis in social media.
Yes.
And why do crises happen so often in this time in social media?
And thank you for having me here, Diego. I would say over 80% of crises happen because organizations are not prepared to deal with an issue before it evolves into a crisis. So issues start offline, whether it's with the government or with the commercial sector. And over time, a customer gets more and more frustrated, so the issue evolves into a crisis, or it can be a citizen that's unhappy with a particular government situation or policy, and once again, over time, the government ignores that citizen, so a larger number of people start sharing the same concern, and it evolves into a crisis. So to answer your question, research shows that anywhere between 60 and 80% of crises could have been averted, meaning that if you had addressed them at an issue level, then they would not have evolved into a crisis level.
So those crises, you said, they start offline.
Yes.
Do they always start offline in the real world?
Yes. In our experience, we found that the vast majority do start offline. And that's one of the challenges organizations have when dealing with social media crisis or so-called social media crisis, because there's a bit of a disconnect between people offline and people online within governments or within organizations. So let's say I walk into a supermarket and I buy a product and I find the product is rotten. So I go online and I talk about my experience offline. Now the person managing the community of that supermarket on Facebook has no idea whether the product was really rotten or not. And by the time he finds out the reality behind that story, the issue has spiraled into hundreds or thousands or even millions of conversations or negative sentiment towards that brand. So yes, what we do need to remember is what people express online in terms of opinions is usually a direct result of what has happened offline, whether it's in elections or in a restaurant or in a supermarket or in any transaction that they make online.
I remember when your colleague Mazen Nahawi was here and a couple of years ago,
yes,
and explaining how the Egyptian uprising could have been anticipated,
yes,
via social networks. And since you're Egyptian,
yes,
as I know,
yes,
can governments profit from a better monitoring of social media?
Yes, 100%. I mean, and we've seen a lot more demand from governments over the past couple of years, and especially since the so-called Arab Spring. So there's a new industry emerging called predictive analysis. Now, we don't want to claim that we can forecast the future, because we can't do that. And social media can't do that either. But what you can do through social media is analyze when something unusual is happening. So for example, if a local government here wants to analyze the probability or the possibility of an uprising towards a particular policy or a particular law, they can analyze the volume of conversation taking place online. Like on average every day, say 1,000 people talk about this issue. They can analyze the sentiment expressed towards that particular issue. What percentage is negative, what's positive, what is neutral. They can analyze the severity of emotions. What does that mean? So are people angry or very angry or extremely angry? Or are people just dissatisfied? So through qualitative analysis, meaning through human analysts like the people that we employ, you can analyze conversations taking place online and find out how the severity of people's emotions towards a particular issue is increasing or decreasing over time. And through that, you can find out whether things are likely to escalate or not. In the case of the Egyptian revolution, we were able to clearly detect, weeks before the revolution took place, that there is one huge increase in volume of conversation calling for a protest, not calling for a revolution, but calling for a protest and calling for demonstrations. The severity of emotions being expressed was getting more and more negative over time. Emotions expressed by people showed a lack of trust and a lack of belief that the current regime is actually genuinely interested in changing anything. So you saw a combination of different factors that we could clearly see online together, indicating that there is action that's going to take place online. Now, about 3 years ago, we held an event at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and we said statements like the following, and I quote, we said, Facebook is about to become a disruptive force in the Egyptian political scene. And I remember a journalist sitting at the conference room saying, don't you think you're really exaggerating? I mean, how much can Facebook really do?
Sounds very strong.
It is very strong. And I remember using the Mohammed al-Barada example specifically at that point. He had just moved back to Egypt. And I said, there's a protest that took place as a direct call for demonstrations on his page. The number of people that participated in that protest was approximately 10 times the number of people that participated in the previous protest before his Facebook page. So at that time there was a lot of doubt. Does the million of conversations online actually transcend offline or not? Are the people only talking online? And I think today we have clear evidence that no, what happens online does have a clear impact, whether it's on your business or on your government.
And what can companies do to manage this crisis? What can they do to use social media to avoid an upcoming crisis?
I think, I mean, we've been talking about this a lot over the past few days here with different clients of ours in Argentina. The two main things, whether a company or a political organization or a government organization need to do is, one, define a crisis, and two, attempt to avert a crisis before it becomes one. Now, let me explain each. So, define a crisis is very important because what happens is often issues online are translated into or are conceived or perceived to be crisis when they are not. Okay, and the simplest example is retweets, the so-called retweets. Okay, so today...
So someone who is insulting you on Twitter is not necessarily a crisis.
No, it is not necessarily a crisis. And if I insult someone on Twitter and 500 people retweet my Twitter, it still may not be an insult. So businesses or organizations need to define what a crisis means to them. And there are a number of different metrics by which we need to have predefined metrics in order to define what a crisis means. Now, part of these is relying on benchmark data. So if a company is not regularly monitoring and regularly analyzing what's happening or what's being said towards them, they don't have historical data. So you may have just seen these 500 insults today, but there were also 1,000 insults 2 months ago. You just so happen to have been out of town when that happened. So to you, you're shocked today and it seems like there's a crisis happening. But in reality, this is something that happens regularly. So by analyzing data on a regular basis and creating benchmarks where you can see what is the average negative sentiment, what is the average volume, what is the average exposure of negative comments. So maybe the person that's tweeting has 10 followers on Twitter, so the message is not actually exposed to many people. So you have a whole set of data that you need to create as benchmarks in order to be able to define what a crisis means. The second part of crisis definition is, what impact does this issue have on my business? Okay. Now that can be analyzed while the crisis or the so-called crisis is happening, but it can only really be analyzed more effectively post-event. And that's why sharing business data is so important for agencies like ours. So if millions of people spoke negatively about my brand online, but that had zero effect on my sales, then most likely, by definition, that is not a crisis. Because a crisis needs to have an impact on my business. If you just don't like my brand, that's okay, because you're still buying it. So we need to look at actual business data in terms of sales, for instance, number of complaints over the phone, or in the case of government, number of votes, for instance. So you need to actually look at offline information as part of your crisis definition. So I said in the beginning, there's two parts to answering your question. The first is defining a crisis, which I've done. The second part is trying to prevent a crisis before it evolves into one, like I said earlier. So crisis starts as an issue, like I said earlier. So as a business, if you're able to address a customer concern effectively, then most likely that customer will not have an interest into severely harming your reputation online. So the vast majority of cases...
But you have to address this guy offline.
You have to address him offline in some cases. In other cases, you can address him online. Like our research shows that about 95% of Facebook posts are not answered by brands. Okay, so brands are creating pages. They're investing a lot in recruiting fans and marketing, etc. But then they're not actually answering people. They're adopting the traditional media concept on social media, which means we are going to broadcast our message and have a one-way communication. Whereas social media is about a two-way communication, about building a relationship with your fans. So people are going to fan pages, and you're finding the brand is trying to sell a product to me there, whereas I'm trying to get information about quality, for instance. So I'm asking that brand, I bought a phone, it stopped working 3 weeks later, why did that happen? Okay? And the brand is not actually answering me, it's just continuing to broadcast messages because they don't have a human sitting there actually looking at every comment and answering. So that's the first point that happens. A customer becomes dissatisfied because he's getting ignored. Now, if the customer issue is addressed at that point, whether online or offline, that's a separate issue, it is much less likely to evolve into a crisis. So to summarize again, you need to address the issue very early on. Now, having said that, in some cases you won't do that, so you do need to have a whole other set of tools to use to address crises as well, including brand advocates, for instance, because people trust people more than they trust organizations. So if I go online today and I trash a particular brand, and then my friends reply to me and they say, Fadl, why? We actually like this brand, it's good, etc. I'm more likely to trust them as opposed to if the brand responding to me and trying to defend themselves.
It sounds fantastic to have those advocates, but where do you get those people talking positively about you?
Yes. I mean, advocates are a combination of mainly two different groups of people. One is people that work within the organization, which are by definition advocates, but may be impartial because they work at the organization. And another group are people that are genuinely interested about that industry. So for instance, if you are, in dairy products, in technology, in banking, whatever it is, you find people that have expressed interest in that industry in some capacity through social media, meaning they're actively discussing that product or that industry, and you invite them to actually come and become, you don't invite them to become advocates, but you invite them to become more knowledgeable about your products and your company. So for instance, before you launch a product, you invite them to come and test that product. If you have a factory, you invite them to go visit that factory and look at your quality standards there. Tell you what they think about the different flavors you're producing. You invite them to test the phone before you release it in the market.
Are there companies doing that?
Yes, of course. I mean, there are companies doing that in many ways. So in many ways, for hundreds of years, companies have been doing that through focus groups. Okay, so companies invite you to come and test the product and tell you what you think about that product. Yeah, that's an industry that has existed before social media. The difference now is you're actually inviting people to test the product and you're incentivizing them to speak about the product. By incentivizing them, I don't mean buy the person or pay them, but for instance, you can give the person a free phone, you give the person a free product. So you are giving incentive. That is reality. Humans need incentives to do things. So you incentivize people to do that. And yes, I mean, telecom operators are doing that all over the world. Banks are doing that. In the US, there's a famous, Sprint has the famous program called the Ninja program, which is a program where customers are not just advocates, but also customers answer each other, which reduces a lot of load on customer service on the company. So if you know the answer to my question, you come in and you answer my question, which reduces the amount of questions that I then place to the call center over the phone or on Twitter or on Facebook. So yes, there are brands, but the majority of brands are not yet doing that successfully.
You monitor what people say, how people talk in social media, and I can imagine that if your brand is Telefonica, for example, it must be very easy to search for the word Telefonica or McDonald's or whatever, and to find out how many people, what they are talking about. But what about with the complexity of the common language of sarcasm and jokes and things like that can't be detected by machines?
Sure. I mean, it's a great question, and it's one that we've learned the hard way. Because when we launched SocialEyez, we thought we would have about 10 people in year one, and maybe 20 to 30 in year two, and a maximum of 40 in year three. Today we are in year three, and we have, I'd say, about 150.
Wow.
So we never thought we would... Yes. We never thought we would need to have that many people. And I would say 80% of our staff are researchers and analysts. And these are people that sit there and do exactly what you're talking about. They actually analyze what people are saying. They understand sarcasm. They understand local dialects, local language. They understand local culture as well. Something may be sarcastic in one place and not sarcastic in another place. A brand may be referred to in many different ways depending on where you are in the world.
Could it be that sarcasm is differently from person to person, and that you have to even know who is saying what is saying?
Definitely. Definitely. That adds to the complexities of analysis, and that's why we do what we call user profiles. So when we try to analyze what someone is saying, we analyze it within context and within perspective. So analyze what else that person is saying. So not if you take the Telefonica example, someone is being sarcastic towards Telefonica. We analyze what else that person is saying in life in general. Are they talking about traffic? Are they talking about weather? Are they talking about other brands? And we see if that person is a sarcastic person by nature, then we don't deem that comment as necessarily a negative comment. We say that person tends to be a sarcastic person in general. So each person is obviously unique. But even for examples like McDonald's, etc., in our region, for instance, McDonald's can be spelled, I'd say, in maybe 10 different ways in Arabic. So it's actually not one way. And in addition to that, I may go in and talk about the Big Mac while you go in and talk about, the Quarter Pounder. So neither of us actually said McDonald's. So we need to analyze not just brand names, but every single product name and executives of these companies as well, because that also affects the company's reputation. So in no way is it a simple thing, and that's why we are what we call a service company, not a technology company. So tools, unfortunately, cannot do what a human analyst can do. Of course, they can help, but the reality is you need someone to sit there and actually analyze things personally.
Do people like to be monitored?
It's a good question, and we get asked that every now and then. In my honest opinion, yes. I know it sounds a bit controversial, but in my honest opinion, yes, because if you're expressing a particular emotion or opinion on social media, whether consciously or subconsciously, you want something to be done as a result of that opinion. You either want the brand to improve their service, or you want your friends to stop buying that service. And either way, you would want the brand or the government to know your opinion. Now, obviously, in some places, there are concerns over government taking action against certain people, and we're not in that business. So we are in the business of giving governments insight into what people think about different things in extreme detail, but we're not in the business of identifying where you live and what's your address so the government can arrest you. So, again, while you may not have the courage or inclination to go up to a politician and give him your personal opinion about him, if I were to come to you and say, would you like me to go and tell that politician what you think of him anonymously, you would most likely say yes, please tell him that. And that's what monitoring is, essentially. And that's why my theory is people don't mind monitoring.
Don't they feel that SocialEyez, for example, and other monitoring companies are invading their privacy?
Like I said, I don't think they are. And we respect privacy laws and privacy policies on social media as well. So if you are talking about an issue privately on your own page on Facebook, for instance, between you and a friend, we do not intrude on that page. We do not have access to password-protected areas. Now, if you're tweeting about something publicly, then you've exposed the message publicly. If you would like to make it private, Twitter gives you the ability and the option to do so. So like I said, we don't view it as an intrusion. Rather, we actually in many ways view ourselves as an enabler between customers and brands or stakeholders and government organizations, because we help institutions understand how they're perceived in order for them to improve whether their services or their products or their offerings.
What of the many social networks we know are the most dangerous for crises, for companies and for governments?
I mean, I'm not sure about danger per se, but I can tell you that I forget the exact statistic, but over 70% of crises emerge on Twitter. And that's primarily because it is by far the fastest way to disseminate information in the world today. Much faster than Facebook, much faster than any other platform, because of the way the platform is structured, because of the limitation in characters, because of the ease of looking at feeds, and more importantly, because of the ease of retweeting things. So
maybe because it's very easy to use in mobile phones.
It's a very important point. So very easy to use on mobiles, whereas Facebook has struggled to create effective mobile applications. And the issue of retweeting amplifies messages in a way that's quite dramatic, if you will. And research also shows that Twitter users are more negative by nature than Facebook users. So,
because I'm a Twitter user,
yes,
and so we are more negative than Facebook users.
We are. And you'll see that...
Which is your favorite Twitter?
Yes. Now, to be honest, I try to resist retweeting negative things that are irrelevant to me, but I find myself genuinely resisting, as opposed to on any other site where you would need to originate content. So I would need to actually create a post and publish it, which takes more time. Even though it takes a minute, it still takes more time because a retweet takes a second. So when you hear about a scandal, especially if it includes an image, for instance, you're very inclined to retweet it just because it's funny or because you know people will be interested in it, or negative news, which is why negative news spreads much faster than positive news, and even on traditional media. So Twitter is by far the main platform where crises originate and crises spread. And we've seen many political events, even the attack on bin Laden. It was actually disclosed, or it was actually portrayed on Twitter before people knew what actually was happening. So the guy was there, he saw the planes coming in, he saw the commandos coming in, he didn't know what happened, and later on he realized that he was the guy that told the world that bin Laden was getting captured. So yes, I mean, Twitter is definitely the fastest one.
And for the Finnish part, some tips for companies, what do they have to do to avoid or to avert crisis on social media?
I would say three things. I mean, number one, like I said, define crisis so that you know not to cry wolf every time. Basically, so you understand when things are really a crisis, when things are not. Number two is have a clear crisis communication plan. So you know when a crisis happens, what do I actually do in terms of how do I respond to people? Who's my spokesperson? Like a mistake many companies do is they kind of hide behind the Twitter handle. Now, if you go out and you publish a video on YouTube, you know, even if it's a 5-minute video of your executives expressing exactly what happened, explaining to people what they're going to solve it, the effect people's names and people's faces have on people is much larger than seeing only text-based messages. And number three is try to avert the crisis before it actually happens through continuously monitoring and continuously analyzing things from an issue level, like I said, before they evolve into an actual crisis.
And that's where you jump in as SocialEyez. Thank you very much. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Estuvimos hablando con Fadl Al-Tarzi, es el CEO de SocialEyez, esta empresa que ayuda a muchas empresas y a gobiernos a monitorear lo que se habla en las redes sociales para evitar las crisis que son cada vez más frecuentes. Muchas gracias.